Lieutenant Commander Data discovered a certain level of impatience when he calculates a lengthy time interval to the nearest second. Human intuition and instinct are not always right, but they do make life interesting. And therapists are always the worst patients, except for doctors, of course. Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Seventh Rule with Sirach Lofton.
Hello, hello.
My name is Ryan T. Husk, and today we're doing a review of Star Trek The Next Generation Season 4, Episode 10, entitled The Loss. Story by Hilary Bader, teleplay by Hilary Bader, and Alan J. Adler and Vanessa Green. That's a tag team right there. And directed by our good buddy Chip Chalmers. This was, let's see, this was December 29th. 1990. Where were you? And how are you today, Sirach Lofton?
I'm great. I'm doing great.
Something I noticed here is that there are about 5 weeks in between the previous episode and this one. Yeah. It went from like
November 20th or something?
Yeah, 17th to December 29th. That's like 6 weeks or something. But that's kind of a weird. You would think that the winter break would be a little later. Like it would start in December and end in January, not start in November and then end still in December. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe back then you guys would get back to work for that week between Christmas and New Year. That just seems weird though.
Yeah, well, now that you say that, I'm sure there was a break for Christmas. But yeah, I don't know that you would be back before New Year's. Anyways, these are air dates, so usually these stuff is recorded long before these air dates. So the gaps are mostly about probably scheduling and programming.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I'm just like thinking about the poor editors or something that are coming in on like December 27th. But yeah, you're probably right. I mean, that stuff's already long done, like weeks before. You're right. What were you going to say?
It's done weeks before. So what I was going to say is that I used to go visit Kerry McLuggage's office when I was doing the show, and I'd pop in every once in a while. And
isn't that what basketball players make the rookies do? Kerry McLuggage, right? That's what they do to the rookies.
Yeah, that's a good one. I'm sure he would definitely like that. But yes. So one of the things that he would have in his office is the board with all the time slots and what shows were being aired on those time slots. So that was always interesting to me that there was a man in the room moving these magnets on the wall. It's just like, this goes at 8 o'clock. This is going to be at 10, 9:30. And so this process is, could be moved and interrupted by a lot of things, right? Mm-hmm. So, for example, September 11th happens, right? Whatever you had on the programming schedule is now moved around because they're like, we're going to do 24-hour coverage of this event. We're not rerunning episodes of Charles in Charge right now. You know what I mean? So, different events in time periods could affect programming. So, for example, this could have happened during the Rodney King riots or something around that time, right? And boom, it would change. O.J. Simpson was another example of programming being pushed aside based on coverage. So that could be one explanation. I'm just putting it out there for the audience because these are the kinds of processes that go on in the decision making.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and that's why I like to kind of look at the date and try to think what was going on at the end of 1990. Nothing too crazy. I remember '89. There was the big Loma Prieta earthquake in my town. You guys in LA had one in 94, I think the Northridge one, 94, 96. Rodney King was around 92 or 3. O.J. Simpson was maybe 96, the verdict, it was that. So there were definitely things going on in those days. And it's always fun to kind of look back at things, like the dates, and even the writing gets kind of affected by it. Sometimes the writing, kind of goes in the direction of the times, But
Yeah, yeah,
this particular episode, one thing I want to point out as we get into it, and as everybody is liking this video and subscribing to the channel, hitting the bell icon for notifications, and the people that are listening in are giving us a 5-star rating and a nice review, and we really appreciate that. And also, please go to patreon.com/the7th rule and become a patron. We got all kinds of fun things for you to do as a patron, and also it helps keep the lights on here because, man, we run a tight ship and a tough operation, and we need your support to, this high production value and all that. It's a big deal. Anyway, but we do really appreciate any support to everybody. Patreon.com/the7th rule. So we got to see Ensign Allenby for a second episode in a row. Remember the Ensign? Like, it kind of...
Is it Ellerby or Allenby?
Allenby.
Oh, I wrote down Ellerby.
Yeah, it's a weird one. When I first heard it last week, I thought they said Ellenby. So I looked it up and it's Allenby. So what's cool about that is I don't remember ever seeing a random ensign of the week being on 2 weeks in a row, except for the one that they introduced. I'm blanking on her name, but everybody in the live chat, you can tell us or in the comments below. The lady that spilled her coffee on Picard, if you remember, like around the second season, Sonia Gomez, and then, or spilled his coffee on his own shirt. And then she ended up becoming kind of friends with Geordi, and they were setting this thing up. She was introduced 2 episodes, and then she was gone forever. This one, Ellenby, 2 episodes, and they're giving her some lines. And you're thinking, oh, is this the new Wesley Crusher replacement? Gone forever after that. It's kind of a bummer because we like new characters. We like having some consistency there rather than Ensign of the Week. She doesn't even have to be there every week. Once every 3, 4, 5, 6 episodes, great, like Chief O'Brien. But anyway, that's Ensign Allenby.
Allenby, Ellerby, Allenby. She's got a lot of names. One of the things that I wish would be done in these situations is a slight introduction into these characters. When you're sitting at the helm, I feel like you're so much in the foreground and in the picture of this production that a light introduction would be warranted in the dialogue. I would like for Picard, for example, to say, Lieutenant Worf, show Ensign Ellerby to her station, or something to that effect, right?
Yeah.
And then a quick line about she's just transferred here from the from the Saratoga, and she'll be joining with us on a few missions, something to that effect. It's like 2 lines or whatever, but
You're right. Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, even something just as simple as, and we've seen things like this before, but something just as simple as, Ensign Ellenby laying a course, blah, blah, blah. She says, okay. And he says, and by the way, welcome to the ship. Your resume was exemplary over at the USS, whatever. And then we go, oh, cool, new character. Right. You're right. Just 1 or 2 lines. And we're like, okay, got it. We have like a feeling of who this person is.
Yes. And they're welcomed aboard publicly, as opposed to just like this random person we see and we're like, yeah, who is this guy that's talking all of a sudden? Like, like a main decision maker at the helm, right? So it's like the helm is such an important position. If you're at one of the positions to me that are, if you're standing in the back in the security position, then I would kind of be like, all right, that's just a security guy in the back. He's he's on his ship. But if you're actually steering the ship or firing photons or on the comms,
getting
like
lines, I think really just if you're getting lines more than just like one of like, I don't know, sir.
Yes.
But she gets like 5 or 6 lines. I mean, this is a legitimate character introduction that just disappears.
So I would prefer that. A little bit of an introduction would be great in these scenarios. I think they just I don't know if how much thought goes into that. It's like, okay, we're having a new character, let's cast somebody, and they just go through that process. But I don't know if they actually think, hey, from audience perspective, maybe we should just give them a slight intro, or maybe they feel that gives the actor a sense that they're going to be there longer than they probably will be. So I don't know what the rationale is behind that, if there is thought or not enough thought. But it would be nice for me. And to piggyback off of that is one other tiny adjustment that I would like to see in these episodes, or just in Star Trek in general, is I feel like there's zero chatter or banter amongst each other when they're actually on the helm, right? So a little bit, like, because when you're at work, there might be something like, hey, can you pass me that you got to stay, or hey, how's your wife doing? It's just like, or how's your baby? Some like little work related chit chat would be nice. And you can still be doing your job, but they're like robotic about, like, okay, I'm monitoring the frequencies, and there's no like, hey, Worf, little chit chat, like, what is that? A new cologne you got on or something? Something.
Colonial cologne. That's what it sounded like you're going to say when you said cologne. So who is good at that? The Orville. The Orville does that because they're a comedy, and so they have their little chit chat. They talk about getting a cap for the bridge. They talk about their favorite soda, things like that. Deep Space Nine does it somewhat, but they would do it at the beginning of every episode and then kind of leave it alone the rest of the way. But yeah, that would be nice. I mean, the most we ever got was Wes and Data exchanging looks. When something happens, they like look, at each other.
Yeah,
I'm like, that's a kid and a robot, okay. But yeah, that would be interesting if, they're like, well, maybe part of that is because it is Data up there. Who's gonna giggle around with Data, or maybe they could put like a kick me sign on his back or something. That'd be fun.
Hey, how's your processing speed doing, Data? My processing speed is doing wonderful. All right.
We also got another character here, by the way. Oh, guess what Ensign Allenby's first name is? I'll give you a hint. It's Tess.
Okay.
Tess Allenby. I don't know. I just thought that was interesting. Okay.
Tess
So
Allenby, okay.
We also got another new character introduced today. And her name was...
No, this is the guest star who was with Counselor Troy.
Yeah, Ensign Janet Brooks. Ensign.
Where do you get the name from? Because I don't remember them saying names.
No, I had to look on IMDb because they did not say it.
Okay.
To my knowledge, they did not say it. They might have said Ensign Brooks when Troy was talking to Picard or Riker about it. She was like reporting to Picard about like, oh, Ensign Brooks, blah, blah, blah. I think they might have said Ensign Brooks then, but I had to look it up to find that out. So Kim Braden plays Ensign Janet Brooks. She also later on plays Captain Picard's wife in Star Trek Generations, the very first movie in 1994. So that's interesting. She's got an interesting hairdo in this episode. But she's also married to a rather successful Star Trek director.
What?
Yeah. And his name is David Carson.
Oh, wow. This is crazy.
Yeah, and David Carson and Kim Braden were actually together at a table at the most recent STLV this year.
I know. That's why it's so crazy, because I just met the both of them.
Really? That's cool.
Yeah, just met. I had never met her before. Of course, I know David already, and so we had a nice chance to have a reunion moment at the Star Trek Las Vegas Creation Convention.
Yeah.
And then he introduced me to his wife, which is, the first time I actually met her, and he was trying to explain who I was, and she's like, "I know, honey, I know um, who he is." So, but yeah, that is crazy. So she gets to play is when she plays Picard's wife in the movie. Is she playing the same character that she's playing in this episode, or
No, no, and it's kind of a smaller thing. It's kind of like a flash forward dream sequence kind of thing. So there's not a ton to it. This is her role in this episode's a bigger role.
okay? And I thought she was fantastic. It's just such a small little circle because I thought
Yeah.
she was fantastic in this episode. I actually really liked her, and I did not recognize her because her hair is a different color in real life. I think she has darker hair, right? If I'm not mistaken. So this is a probably a wig piece, and the look is so different for me when I see her. But now I'm seeing some of the facial features and stuff. So yeah,
Yeah, the hair looks like 1983. You know,
yeah,
it's an
yeah.
interesting choice.
It's a very dated hairstyle.
But it
Um,
is a good role. Because
oh, I loved it.
it could have been a role that was just like in the first 3 minutes and then we move on, or maybe it bookends at the very end when Troy learns her thing. But it was actually this recurring character within the episode that kept coming back, and it was actually a little bit more
Yeah,
involved. The character was than I remember. I was like, "That's cool, man. Good for Kim Braden. Like getting a pretty good, guest spot. This wasn't just a 1 day thing. Wasn't just like a introductory, segment thing, but she was up and down throughout the episode. It was actually really good. And I actually think this episode is better than I remember it. What I remember of this particular episode is two things. I mean, the episode was okay from what I remember, but there were two takeaways when I think of this episode, I go, oh, there were two things that I thought were really good that really impacted me when I first saw it way back in the day.
yeah,
One was the way Deanna Troy explains her loss of feeling, the way she's just like, all I'm seeing is like blank faces. And I remember that hit me, and it made me kind of be able to understand the loss of, her empathy skills, where she's now just looking at blank faces, whereas normally she's looking at faces, but she's feeling something at the same time. And I remember when they said that, I was like, that's a good description. It makes it to where I can understand this thing that
yeah.
should theoretically be understandable and impossible to understand because it's not a real thing, as far as we know. Um, and the other thing was the idea of these two-dimensional beings and getting caught in the two-dimensional beings. Because once you start talking about three dimensions and two dimensions, it gets really interesting. And the way they show it, it's like at an angle, but then it kind of turns and like that. So you could see, oh, this is why I didn't see it. So
Hmm.
those were two things that stuck with me as being very good, very interesting ways of introducing and describing new ideas. And so I remember really being impacted by those. And those were like things that stuck with me for whatever it's been, 30 years.
Yeah. One of the things I like about Star Trek is when it goes into uh, deal with science fiction themes that are based in some sense of reality, taking something from reality, from physics, from shared knowledge, and applying it to an episode and exploring it. So the idea of what a two-dimensional being would behave like in a three-dimensional plane was very well explained, and it's something that I think is now being considered in the other way around, which is how we as three-dimensional beings are interacting with four-dimensional beings, and what would that
Yeah.
be like? So it would be the same relativity that we saw with this 2D, 3D situation where one can't really comprehend the other.
Hmm.
Um, a four-dimensional being would see us in the same way that we see that two-dimensional being, and being that we don't have one of the parameters of the plane of that existence, right? In this
Hmm.
particular case, two-dimensional only have, like, let's say, length and width with no depth, and um, as you keep adding parameters, then you become invisible on the other person's spectrum, on the other dimension
Right,
spectrum.
exactly. And that's what's interesting when, and I don't know too much about this, but I know that it is said that the fourth dimension is time. And what's interesting about that is, so that's why it's very difficult for things in two dimensions to intersect with things in three dimensions. Because for something that's like this, but doesn't go, doesn't have any depth, then the only intersection that's possible is if the three-dimensional thing happens to be at exactly this depth. But anywhere else it won't hit. Same thing with three and four dimensions, the fourth dimension being time. Let's say, for example, this baseball is three dimensions, right? You got length, width, height, right? But what about time? So let's say I put my finger on here, right, for that second. Okay. So that fourth dimension is time. If I've got my finger there, cool. But the only way a four-dimensional thing would intersect with that is if they happen to be there, like at that exact time, or that we would intersect with them at that exact time. Because if I go like this and are just there for a millisecond, then something that exists in four dimensions, there's no intersection there, because so I could put a penny here 15 years from now, and it's not going to intersect with my finger being there because they're at different times. That fourth dimension doesn't line up. Anyway, it can be explained much better than how I just did, but that's what's interesting about dimensions is theoretically something that lives in two dimensions can't intersect with three dimensions unless it's perfectly lined up, and then third and fourth, and then fifth dimension. I don't even know what that is. I think it's like castor oil or something. Maybe I'm wrong.
It's a movie with Chris Tucker.
No, that's the fifth
No,
element.
oh, Fifth Element. Okay, never
Yeah,
mind.
I think.
No, I don't know. I think that they did a good job with the 2D, 3D explanation in the graph that they were showing the
Yeah.
captain, and just that little graph pretty much summarized, you know, the dilemma that they were facing in this particular episode, which I thought was great. I enjoyed the science behind it. I enjoyed the revelation that, like a moth to fire to a flame, that this particular two-dimensional object was being attracted to something or going towards
Mm-hmm.
something. So all of those kinds of realizations were great, but more importantly for me was some of the other things that I got out of this episode, particularly the fact that we barely get to see Troy at work doing her job as a professional. So this actually opened with her doing counseling, which is like,
Yeah.
I don't know, 4 seasons in, and I think this is the first time I can remember seeing her actually being like, in the office counseling, and she was doing a great job, I thought, with this, with Kim Braden as the guest star. I thought the two of them played well opposite each other. And I thought in general that Deanna Troy really was shining in this episode. I thought Marina Sirtis did a great job as an actor in this particular episode, kind of, because there was a moment, she switches from the character we normally see into this more less patient person who was more emotional and um, even confrontational.
Yeah.
Uh, and I felt like I saw the difference in the performance as far as how she acts when she's Troy with the powers as opposed to Troy without the powers. And I did notice a behavioral change that she was frustrated, and I thought she delivered that in her performance really well.
Hmm. I also have thoughts on that, but let's take a quick break. And then when we get back, we're going to dissect this episode a bit more because, again, I think this episode holds up a lot better than I expected. We'll be right back on The Seventh Rule. Hey, everybody, welcome back to The Seventh Rule with Sirach, the game changer, Lofton.
Game changer.
He changes every game. Okay, here are the trivioids of the week. It's been 5 months since Mark's accident. Picard wants Riker to get some fresh holodeck air. Data has discovered a certain level of impatience when he calculates a lengthy time interval to the nearest second. Counselor Troy is feeling very dizzy. Beverly wants to run an internuncial scan on Troy. The worst thing about loss is how other people change. The Enterprise is caught in a two-dimensional wake. Picard wants to put off the Talibadans. That was just weird. Empathic awareness is not a requirement for the position of ship's counselor. Human intuition and instinct are not always right, but they do make life interesting. Two-dimensional beings are caught in a cosmic string, and therapists are always the worst patients, except for doctors, of course. Okay, so there's been some criticism, I think, and maybe we'll see some of that criticism in the free-for-all, where people think that the ship's counselor and the ship's therapist, Deanna Troy, should not be acting so, I don't want to say weak, weak-minded, weak-willed, vulnerable, imperfect. She's just, it seems on the outside she's not handling it well, and a lot of people don't like that, a medical professional not being able to, but I found this to be very realistic. I mean, if I lost my sight, I would probably pout for a little bit before I just jumped right back into normal life. If somebody lost their arms, when Nog lost his leg, he was afforded a little bit of time to vent, to cry, to pout, to heal, to feel sorry for himself before he got back up into it. And they were very patient about it. So I'm not really sure that criticism is warranted. And I'm not sure if we're going to hear that on the free-for-all, but I feel like there has been some criticism about that. And I thought that Counselor Troy, no matter how great of a medical professional she is, I think it's perfectly okay for her to be human, for her to be, vulnerable and imperfect and, fallible about all this. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think she's justified. Everybody likes to say how somebody's supposed to act or react in the situation, and this goes down to almost everything. Oh, this person should be donating all their money to charity, or this person should do this, or that person should do that. We're always telling people how they should or should not behave in certain situations.
Sure.
That's not real. It's not really fair or realistic because everybody has different levels of sensitivities and vulnerabilities. Remember, she's also a betazoid. So I thought that the Riker making a direct, kind of directly attacking her betazoid, kind of, what does he call aristocracy? Or she said, "You're an aristocratic betazoid," I think, and he said betazoid character. So he's saying essentially this could be part of your betazoid reaction, right? Is to just, because sometimes her mom has these kinds of like, I feel sorry for myself, catch an attitude with people for no reason. And so that could be part of her just, natural instincts as a betazoid, half betazoid person. And people were trying to appeal to her human side, which is, you're also a psychologist. So I can understand the argument on both sides, right? So the half of it is she has the ability to have this empathy where she essentially knows what you're feeling or what your real emotional state is. But the other half is you're a human, so we know that you have tools of psychological analysis that humans have when they go through schooling and have the professional training of understanding, different ways to deal with trauma and different tools to help evaluate those things. So I think there is a valid argument on both sides. The human side of her still should be able to have the tools, which she used later on in the episode when analyzing with data about what it was causing these particular two-dimensional beings to exist, right? So she used the human psychological tools. She didn't have the ability to access the
Right.
betazoid emotional tools. So I think that's where, you if you lean towards the human side of how you perceive her, you would say, why is she acting like that? She's got the mental professional tools to be able to deal with that. But then if you lean towards the betazoid side of her, she's having a crisis moment where she has lost a sense, one of her basic senses. And so she's having a reaction to that as well on that side of her DNA. So I think both arguments can have some validity to it.
Totally. And if I had to lose one of my senses, it would definitely be the sense of smell. The gym would be much more pleasant to me without my sense of smell. That's for sure. And hey,
Yeah, but
everybody.
then you would also lose food. So you with smell you would lose taste. So
That's true. It's worth it.
you know.
So, look, we have a very special treat for everybody here. Our good buddy Jason M. Okun is joining us right now. What's up, Jason?
Not much. How are you guys?
Awesome.
Doing good. Yeah. How are you doing?
All right. It's a nice and sunny afternoon. The weather's great.
You look sharp.
And we're talking about Counselor Troy. So, here's the thing,
Yeah.
Jason. First of all, what do you think of this episode overall? Do you feel like Counselor Troy's acting a little bit weak? Or do you think it's an accurate depiction of how people would be in this kind of situation?
I think it's a little weak. I think it's slightly shallow, frankly. I think the result would have been better had she not regained her ability so quickly. And I think the reactions are a little too sort of diva-like, if you will. And again, this is just the way the episode is written, certainly not the way Marina performed it. I think she did very, very well with the material she was given. And yeah, it's nice to see her get some solid stuff to do, as opposed to just, frankly, in some scenes, almost being the background. So it was really good to see that. But I think it was not as realistic as it could have been. I think it's a little too shallow. I mean, it touches a very important topic, disabilities, but I don't think the episode overall ends up doing it justice.
Yes, I'll agree with you about how it approaches the topic of disability. I think that was also another point that I wanted to make, just in evaluating the episode, because she does have a very good moment there where she talks to Picard and she says, "With all due respect, Captain, you don't know what you're talking about. That is a common belief with no scientific basis, no doubt created by normal people who felt uncomfortable around the disabled. I am disabled." And I thought that was kind of a big moment there. It was a great speech for her. It was a great kind of voice speaking on behalf of people who are disabled. I felt like that kind of voice is necessary in the public forum, and having it in this particular episode was something that I enjoyed. It was some meat for the bone for her character to be able to speak up on something. And so from that particular perspective, I enjoyed her being that kind of advocate, sticking up for this particular moment. However, to go compliment what you were saying earlier, there were moments in which I felt she was being sharp and a little piercing with her language towards Beverly. The whole "it's just hope, Beverly, not false hope." That was kind of a cut, and it was a dig. And then she says, "You don't have to tell me, Beverly. I understand the psychology." That was another, like, just the way it was said was just not a way you would talk to a colleague who you have respect for, and a person that we've seen have intimate conversations with each other. It was more like, you don't know me, you have no idea kind of conversation, as opposed to respecting the friendship and education of Dr. Crusher.
Yeah, see, I think that's absolutely forgivable. This is an extremely traumatic experience for her. And I think that if that's the worst any of us did after, the day of or the day after losing a sense, I think that would be commendable. But that's my thinking after seeing this episode for like the third or fourth time. When I first saw it, I was like, I don't know. What do you think, Jason?
Well, I mean, it's certainly, I think sort of the extreme reactions are what they are. I think they're not unnatural, and it depends on, what you would describe to this character. And frankly, we don't know too much about Troy to draw those conclusions.
Yeah, that's true.
Because we just don't. I mean,
Yeah.
we just get little glimpses here and there. I think people react differently, and I don't think it's too out of place to sort of snap. It's a little unusual sort of for the Roddenberry universe of that time to have sort of Starfleet characters react that way, which is frankly more like, you or I would react to something like that than somebody, in the Starship Enterprise. So it was very nice to see that. As I said before, I wish this kind of was carried through a little longer and sort of a little deeper. I mean, they certainly touched on something important, and I think the reactions were frankly more realistic than they would, than they could have been otherwise. I think the story was, because it's episodic television, was wrapped up a little too quickly and a little too nicely in this neat package. I think
right, the way she got her stuff like in an instant, right away, rather than like it coming back slowly or painfully or anything.
Yeah. But just to add to that point, she's also Betazoid. So my idea is she started to act like how Luoxana acts. There's moments where Luoxana, when she's irritated, is very direct, and her words cut. Right? She can have some cut to her words, and so I felt like that the Luoxana in her was starting to come out a little bit when she was talking to people. But I want to ask both of you, what did you think? Because I felt there's a validity to this, but I'd like to know how you felt when Troy calls Dr. Crusher and says, I'm feeling dizzy. And it's basically, that's a 911 call moment, in my opinion, right? This is a 911 call. I'm fainting. I'm feeling out of character. I'm calling 911 with my communicator. How did you feel about Dr. Crusher's response about, let me go and I'll get to it later type of thing? And then later on, Troy saying, while you were over there treating skinned elbows.
That was pretty good, though. That was pretty good.
What did you think about? What did you guys think? Yeah.
Well, I'll just jump in really quick because my answer is pretty short. I just kind of thought like, my first thought was there were injuries being reported throughout the ship right before that, 10 seconds before that. And they said, but they're all minor. So on one hand, I'm expecting, hey, they're busy. They're getting all these calls. They're finding out they're all minor, but they're fielding all these calls. But on the other hand, this one seems like it maybe might not be minor, right? Like what you're saying, Strzok. So maybe this should take a little bit more urgency. What do you think, Jason?
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, we're talking about medical triage, and it really depends on what other circumstances are going on, what other injuries there are. If they're minor, of course. And the other thing has to do with, I think, what we perceive visually and what we perceive, auditorily. If you actually close your eyes and listen to the dialogue, it does not sound as dire as what it looks like, because she's acting out a lot of this. She's dizzy. I mean, somebody says, well, I'm a little dizzy, so, hang on, somebody will be there soon. But if you actually look at her performance makes you feel like there's a lot more, it's a greater emergency than what it sounds like. So I think there's not to make any excuses, but there's a little bit of that going on as well.
But I want to add to that, though, because in the same way that the sound of it versus the look of it, when you look at Dr. Crusher's medical bay, the sick bay, there was nobody sitting on the beds. It wasn't like an emergency room full of people hanging out and, with wrapped up elbows and bandages around their head. And it wasn't like they just got in a ship full of, deserted or injured passengers. So I thought that was the intensity.
Right. And I thought that was a director's choice. The writers didn't put that in probably, but maybe I'm wrong. But my first thought was, hey, where are all the people in sickbay? We just heard 10 seconds ago there are reports of injuries everywhere. So you would think that there'd be minor injuries of skinned elbows and things going in and out, and it was butt empty. She was just hanging out with her pals.
Well, I mean, there's an obvious reason for that. I mean, this is a bottle show. So
Yeah.
I think this is a money-saving show. So you're not going to have a lot of extras or anything else. I mean, yeah, there's that, of course.
They could have put Doug Drexler and Larry Nemechek in the background, you know.
Yeah, she said, I have a sick bay full of headaches. I'm like, full of headaches? I couldn't, like, it just didn't sound to me like she had that much. First of all, what's up with the beam technology? Because clearly,
True.
just beam over here I'm going to beam you over to the sick bay, and I don't have to go walk over there and take a turbo lift. I don't know, but that's just me. I guess they reserve it for certain issues. But what did you think about Guinan and the use of her
great.
character and the scene? Yeah.
First of all, that's just what Beverly Crusher calls her patients, her headaches. it's kind of off-putting, but that's a little known dark secret of hers that she just says, I had a couple headaches today, and and we know what that means. I thought Guinan was great because she does that beautiful thing of getting the information out of Troy by pretending that she wants to take the position. She's like, oh yeah, I could do that. I could do that. And I thought that was maybe the best written scene in the episode. Jason's nodding. You agree?
Oh, I absolutely agree. The interesting part is it's played slightly differently than it's scripted. So the lines of dialogue for Guinan are changed a little bit. And I think, and I found that to be sort of persistent throughout a bunch of episodes. Her dialogue gets changed the most. And I wonder if Whoopi had something to do with that. But
I'm sure. I'm 100% sure.
But invariably, I think what comes on the screen is certainly better than what it reads like on the page. And I think the use of Guinan, however sparingly she was used, because she was typically available for one day of shooting, has always been very, very good. And I think here it just flows very, very nicely and fits exactly where it needs to be.
Do you know or remember any of the minor differences in the dialogue?
She talks about the lines of the bar, things of that nature. And it's like, I'd better be a counselor because there's, lines of the bar and things of that nature. I mean, I can find it.
Sounds like it just flows a little bit better in the final product.
It's still the same kind of theme going on. A lot of the lines that still kind of go along that sort of path. But there are a few things here and there that don't flow as smoothly as it ended up on the screen.
Oh, here's something fun, you guys. Oof, almost dropped it. That was a close one. Home run of the episode. That almost rolled off the side of my desk.
That would have been a foul ball of the episode.
I know. I'm going to kick my own ass. Sirach, who gets the home run of today's episode?
It's very rare I get a chance to give it to Deanna Troy, and I think that this episode was her opportunity to showcase some of her acting skills. And I thought that the chops were great. There was that moment where she was vulnerable. There was moments when she felt confident in the beginning. There was that realization moment where she actually felt conflicted when Picard asked her to join Data in doing the work to find out about this solution. I thought she played all of those beats very well. And so I'm going to give the home run to Marina Sirtis. Another moment that I'd like to point out is when she finally does get Dr. Crusher to show up, and she says, "Come on, can you walk with me?" And she says, "Yeah, I can walk. I'm fine." And then she has a moment of like, I'm not fine. She played that beat very well. And then the other beat she played very well is also when she says, "You're all blank to me." I think you mentioned that earlier in the review. And that line also just, it hit home the way she delivered it. So I'm going to give the home run to Marina Sirtis.
Jason, you're up to the plate. What do you think? Sirach's the leadoff hitter. But you're the number 2 guy. You're the guy that's going to bunt him to second or hit him home. Well, who gets the home run here?
Maybe. How about I split it 3 different ways? Maybe not equally. But certainly, Marina gets the home run here. I mean, I'm with Sirach here. Her performance is great. I mean, she was given a lot of things to do as opposed to what she usually would be getting, and she did marvelously. I think it was a wonderful episode for her. I would say that because this is the bottle show, showing it in a different way is not that easy. And I think to some degree, Chip Chalmers did a pretty decent job directing the episode. There are some shots that were different and interesting. For example, that second session in Troy's office that starts from the top. You actually see the office from the top. Very interesting shot. Actually, in the script, that scene started with Troy's voiceover in her counselor's personal log. That I think is the only one that I've ever seen. I don't think it ever appears on screen anywhere. Where she basically expresses her frustration that she knows the psychology, but she can't help her patients. How do I help them? Sort of that comes out a little bit. So I think Chip Chalmers, and a slight bit to technobabble. There's a hell of a lot of it in this episode. So it gets a little bit of that home run.
Yeah, easy for me. Marina Sirtis gets the home run, but a lot of it is because, we're all human, even if some of us play half humans. And if you're not getting a lot week by week by week, and then suddenly you get an episode where you're like, whoa, maybe you haven't been exercising that acting muscle for 3 years. Maybe it's hard to get up for it. I mean, you're not supposed to because you're a professional actor, but we're all still human. And it's possible that it may be hard to kind of say, whoa, I'm not just going to like show up and, eat the chicken wings and say my one line this week and move on. She was like, she saw this and was like, whoa, I need to show up for real this week. And she did. And she hit a home run. So congratulations to her. And this episode was a lot better than I remember it. In fact, I think it's a good episode. I think there's a lot about it that's very good. The ending was a little weird, little weak. I also thought it was weird that at the very, very end, we saw the Enterprise coming at us and then cut to the Enterprise going away from us. Usually we just have like 2 seconds of the Enterprise going away. This time it was like 30 seconds. I was like, what is this? The motion picture all of a sudden? What is this? Spaceballs? But yeah, home run. Good job. So also another good job is our friends Homer Frizzell, Dr. Anne-Marie Seagull, Eve England out in Wales, Yvette Blackman, Tom, TJ Jackson Bay out in Missouri, Titus Muller, Dr. Muhammad Noor, Tierney C. Diekman, Anil O. Palat. Joe, by the way, it's in his contract. I have to say Joe, yeah, I know, it's weird. Joe Balsarati, Mike Gu, Dr. Stephanie Baker, Carrie Schwent, Faith Howell, Edward Foltz, live from Tokyo, the Matt Boardman, Chris McGee, Justin Weir, Jake Barrett, Henry Unger, Allison Leach Hyde, Julie Manasfi, Jed Thompson, Dr. Susan V. Gruner, she likes bugs, Glenn Iverson, Dave Gregory, Tim Baum, Chris Sternett, he likes wine, Dylan Powell, Peter Draymore, and of course, Jason M. Okun and Greg K. Wickstrom out in Hawaii. All right, everybody, stick around. We've got the free-for-all up next. We will be right back on the seventh rule.
Talk about the Babel record.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the seventh rule with Sirach Lofton. It's time for the free-for-all. It's time for some fun, everybody, with Melissa Longo.
Hello.
And also the writing team of Mike Gu and Stephanie Baker. That's Dr. Stephanie Baker. If you have an ampersand, it means they are a writing team. If you have the full AND, it means that they wrote, but not a writing team. All right. And Carrie Schwent, a.k.a. Crafty Bear. Mai is live in Tokyo. She's got things to say. Allison Leach Hyde, coolest earrings in the house. Chris McGee is the Dark Lord, but don't let that scare you. Faith Howell is on the bridge of the Enterprise D. And the Matt Boardman is smoldering. All right. Jake Sisko guesses the IMDb score.
I've been so off lately. I'm gonna say this was like a 7-3.
7-3. Does anybody else have any guesses that doesn't already know? Whoa.
7-5.
I think Sirach's got it.
6-9.
Nasty. Anybody else?
Didn't think about
The answer actually is 6.0. What?
Holy shit. He's up
Wait,
in
What?
0?
What
Wow.
happened? Did Mai just go and like zero bomb it or something?
Yeah, I was going to say, what's up?
Did Mai just like create like 4,000 accounts and bomb it? We're going to find out. That laugh's telling me I might not be far off, but we'll see.
No, I haven't logged on to IMDb in years, so not a problem.
We'll see. All
So
right.
you left the reviews back then.
So, were there any non-appearance mentions? I didn't catch any. No. Nope. No. Okay. Melise is going to be like, what about Picard's tea? There's some. Were there any some kinds of or some sorts of or of some sort?
I caught a couple of them.
Nice.
First one was Riker in the observation lounge discussing what force could be holding the Enterprise. Asks, could it be some sort of tractor beam? Then later on, Troy, also in the observation lounge, in response to Data's, observation of the brief interruption in the creature's movement pattern, says, which may suggest some kind of awareness of our presence.
Ooh, that was a good one. That was a sneaky one. All right, Melissa Longo, please get us started off on the right track. I love that observation lounge name, by the way. I think that's cool. What do you think of this episode?
I actually like this episode. Contrary to many of the reviews on IMDb that I did read, and somebody else who said that this is one of their least favorite Troy episodes, but for me it was kind of the opposite, because it felt like the first time that we actually got a character-driven episode for Deanna Troy. The very first time. And many of the reviews were like, well, she's out of character, she wouldn't do this, she wouldn't do that, she wouldn't do this. But I think that all of her reactions were plausible in my point of view, because she lost something that was so profound to her identity, that was so ingrained in her since birth, and then it's suddenly gone. It's akin to losing a limb. And while we may not think that having empathic abilities is that important, it is very important to her, and again, to her identity. So I think that what she was experiencing was all of the stages of grief, because she experienced this huge traumatic loss, and it is traumatic. And her resigning from Starfleet is the same kind of reaction, and her anger is the same kind of reaction Nog experienced when he lost his leg. He got angry at Jake and threw a table across the room. He resigned from Starfleet and was wanting to resign from Starfleet and live his life out in a holosuite program, because this was how he was dealing with this loss. And there was so much fear of the future, her future, because her identity as a counselor was based on her Betazoidian empathic abilities, and she thought that's the only thing that made her special. And when you take that away, then what is she? And I think that we often spend too much time, or we often use our superpowers, our own the thing that makes us special, or our own special talents, as a crutch in a way, we negate the other things that make us special too, because just because she was an empath, that wasn't the only thing that made her a great counselor. She was a good communicator. As she was talking to Data, we saw that she has all these other gifts that that make her special. And I'll try and wrap up. But the other thing that I really liked about this episode as well is the use of Riker and Guinan. This is the first time I've felt that Riker and Troy's relationship had some kind of authenticity. I felt the love between them. I felt that he cared about her. She cared about him. She cared about him enough to lash out at him because he was safe. He was the safest person that she could lash out at. And he was stern with her, but not in an unkind way. And he was her shoulder to cry on, but who else better to cry on than Riker, the person that you are closest to? So, and I love that he called her an aristocrat, because part of her is, and I'll save the rest for things left unsaid because I have a lot more. But yes, I did enjoy this episode.
Nice. Excellent work. Thank you very much, Melissa Longo, out in Southern California's beautiful San Fernando Valley. Let's go with Dr. Stephanie Baker up next. What's up, Dr. Stephanie? What do you think of this one?
Hi, I've always liked this episode because I'm a fan of Deanna. I do feel like the writers could have done a better job writing for her. It was a little shrilly at times, as if that's how women act when they're angry. And a la Friends, I would say this is the one where Deanna has a tantrum. But after listening to Melissa, I agree that it does. It's good to see Deanna go down a dark path and then people help her back up. I also was surprised that nobody thought, oh, we're in this bed of two-dimensional beings, and is that why Diana's empathy is gone? That didn't seem to come up. And I think they could have stuck it in even if they didn't figure it out. But it was as if it was something separate from what was happening around the ship. That's it.
Yeah, great points. Thank you very much, Dr. Stephanie Baker. Speaking of great points, I bet Mike Goo's got a few for us. What do you think of this one? Oh, by the way, they have matching shirts, you guys. Check it out. It's The Emissary, and you can get it at Walking Art made by Melissa. Can't promise you'll look as good as they do, but you'll look pretty good in it.
Better.
What do you think, Mike Goo?
You'll look better. Yeah, I'd love to talk a little bit about that all of that that was just said. I think informs my thoughts. I do think that perhaps Deanna, because she grew up as an empath and not having the full telepathic powers of a Betazoid, like full-blooded, I just feel like she may have already been through this once in her life, about being different and kind of disabled from her full Betazoid planets, normal citizens. And so it did seem like the reaction was a little over the top. But I love the scenes between she and Riker. That line from Riker, "Oh, now we're finally equals now in this moment." I think it was just what Melissa said. Very finally an episode where we get into Deanna and her growth. And that's the focus. And then there's also the corollary of needing to empathize with the captain, right, with Maxwell, to get him off his his gunship. So yeah, I liked it.
Excellent. Thank you so very much, Mr. Mike Goo. Carrie Schwent is just about ready to go out the door to go see New Kids on the Block, or NKOTB, as the cool kids say, as the cool Ks say. Right. I guess it should be. What do you think of this one?
I really, really liked it. I really, really like this one. Marine. It's It's another Deanna Must Suffer episode, and it is going on my list. I believe this is number 5, according to the list I made. But poor thing gets just put through the ringer. But Marina, for me, absolutely just knocks it out of the park. Just shows all of the analogy I came up with. She shows all of the colors of her sort of acting rainbow, because you get to see like all of it. And I think she is just fantastic in it. And I learned that they considered making her loss permanent, which I found very intriguing. And if the show was being made today, they definitely would have probably either considered doing it for sure, or maybe making it a season-long thing, and maybe she gets it back at the end of the season. Maybe work that into the plot of the season finale somehow if they were making it today.
Sirach was bringing up something similar in our earlier review. Yeah.
Yep. And I think Guinan is definitely some kind of Jedi. She was working her mojo really, really, really well in this episode, and both of those scenes were just absolutely hysterical. And I said to Eric at the end of the episode when we were finished watching it, I'm like, okay, if someone were to create fictional versions of him and I's relationship, it's absolutely Riker and Troy. The way he is there for her the entire episode, even when she's trying to push him away, he even manages to crack a joke and make her laugh in the middle of her crying jag. And actually, for the record, I would love to have seen Riker try to go up to Worf and give him a hug. I think that would just be way too funny. Very much love that. I'm going to try to get everything in while I'm thinking of that. But yeah, Riker was very much there for her. Even if she didn't want him to be, he knew she needed him anyway. And every time he says Imzadi, just gives me the warm fuzzies. I just love that name for them. And the comp that sort of came to mind relating to Deanna for me was Eric is red-green colorblind. So he's never been able to see my favorite color, purple, the way I see it. And if I were to suddenly wake up one day and suddenly I'm red-green colorblind and I can no longer see my favorite color on the planet or all of my favorite colors, I'd probably be pretty angry too. And he'd be supportive, but he wouldn't be able to completely understand why I miss seeing the color purple. But that was sort of the analogy that I came up with. And for the limerick for today, I decided to go for Deanna. She is deep in her feels. So we'll finish with that. What I'm going through, no one understands. You think you do, but there's no way you can. Please don't try to sympathize. You cannot see through my eyes. I hope it comes back, because that would be grand.
Excellent work. Thank you very much. Carrie Schwent, a.k.a. Crafty Bear. All right, Mai is live in Tokyo with some three-dimensional talk for us. What do you think of this one?
Some plain talk, yeah. One interesting observation I had at the beginning, Deanna's sitting there in the counseling session with her arms crossed in front of her. And typically in Western societies, this is seen as sort of a blocking or a protecting pose. Not exactly what you'd expect to see from someone trying to elicit comments from a patient. But curiously, here in Japan, the crossed arms when listening and which initially put me off here because I thought it indicated anger or impatience on the part of my colleagues, it's a clear symbol of giving the discussion serious attention. It's the crossed arms here indicate that your listener is taking the topic so seriously, they're blocking out everything else, and they're focused on your words. So who knew Deanna was Japanese? I thought that was very interesting. Later on, the other part of this show, not just Deanna's story, but the science aspect of it, Data mentions an aggregate field of plane polarized objects appearing and disappearing. I thought to myself, why would they disappear? Think about a piece of paper. If you're side onto it, you're not going to see it. But if you poof your head up an inch, oh, there it is. So Picard's there rotating the ship in 5-degree increments, trying to figure out what to do. rather than elevating it or dropping it by 1 meter. If he'd done so, then he would have been able to see the plane of things. I thought, if he's operating in space, why wouldn't he not maneuver in 3D? I found that a little bit weird. And related to this, if you can't form a warp field because the graviton field is the disruption of the graviton field, because you've got this plane of two-dimensional things doing its thing, well, use impulse, because that pushes the ship away from inside the engine instead of using space to make itself move. And then get away from that, and then you can all of a sudden kick in the warp drive. I thought there was some stuff missing there on that aspect of the story. Deanna's story was a key component of this episode for sure. But yeah, I think the score is reflective. I think, to be honest, her pity party was a little bit much. As a counselor, she must have been trained in multiple methods of discerning what a patient felt, visual cues, context of words, etc. That was too much. I think they overplayed this aspect of the story a little bit. I wanted to treat her like my kids when they refuse to eat. When you get hungry enough, you'll eat. Offered. So. But I thought Guinan's reverse psychology was awesome. She just totally kicked butt on that. Overall, I thought this episode did have the crew acting as a whole. It was as if they were interacting with each other using their relevant strengths of each member's position or personality or how they're described. And I thought that was great. I loved that aspect of it, but it just didn't give me a good science vibe. Data talks about employing Bayesian principles, which basically means using guesswork, or Geordi's torsional force thing, which is opposing twisting force. Not exploring options using 3D movement. It seemed like there was how can I put this? There was an abundance of terminology that assumed a lesser informed viewer. And I generally think of Star Trek fans as being the ones that actually paid attention in physics. So I'm gonna give it a generous 6.5. I'm not gonna go 6, so I'll go 6.5 on this.
Excellent work. Thank you very much, Mai, live in Tokyo. All right, Allison Leach Hyde, who is live in New Mexico, for all of you that asked. What'd you think of this one?
This one's grown on me over time. When I first couple of times seeing, not my favorite, but something that really struck me in this episode is this is a day that's happened. Troy's gone through a lot in a day. She went blind in a day. And yeah, she went through pretty much all 5 stages of grief in a day. And they did a kind of nice job of showing all 5 stages, but I'm like, this isn't a lot of time. We all have days where we're really good at being ourselves, but there are days where we have bad days. And I'm like, and she's having a pretty okay day going blind. So I'm like, that's actually not that bad, her reactions, because she did lose the sense she relies on the most to function in this universe. And so I that hit me on this episode. I'm like, it's been a day. She has a day to actually come to acceptance of my life is different now, or we just don't know what's wrong. So I think that probably could have been written more smoothly. She's having to go through this, not knowing what's going to happen to her, and gets to go through all of these stages of losing something very important to her. But she also needs to give time. She shouldn't have gone, I'm going to resign. I'm like, it's been a day. You don't know enough about what's going on to resign. I want to give all the ladies in this episode some great props for all of their acting. They were wonderful in this episode. I want to say especially Beverly was great. All of her facial expressions, when Troy's yelling at her, she's already feeling that. She's like, I left my friend on the floor for however amount of time, probably not too terribly long, but still long enough. She's like, what if I had gotten there faster? And that playing out on her face is great. And whenever we get Whoopi, everyone just shines when Whoopi's on screen with them. So I always love having her in the episode. And that last scene where Deanna is apologizing and thanking them all is wonderful. It makes the episode for me. So that's really what I took from this episode. And 2 times Picard made me laugh when he put his head in his hands and just went, oh, when when Troy came to resign. I loved that. And then at the end, when she stood up, because, she's getting all of her senses back, and both Picard and Riker just stand up very synchronously. I'm like, oh my God, that's funny. Like, thank you. So there are a couple little light moments that I loved. And of course, when Riker gave Data a hard time for not putting seconds in his time frame, I loved that, because that harkens back to the original series for me and Spock. So I love all of that little tying ins of what the Star Trek universe finds funny. So I like the episode a lot more now as an adult than I did as a kid. So I guess that's kudos to the writing of making something believable. So.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. Allison Leach Hyde in New Mexico. All right, Dark Lord, do your worst. What do you think of this one?
Well, I got to be honest with you. This is another episode that I used to skip during rewatches because I didn't appreciate the drama and the allegory. Also, maybe because I was young and preferred more action-based episodes at the time. But like Allison, watching it now, I can tell that it's clearly a study into what disabled people might go through, albeit in a very condensed time frame and perhaps exaggerated a bit. I don't know, but still gets the point across. And also, as Allison alluded to, you can even pinpoint when Troy experiences the 5 stages of grief.
Yeah.
Also, you can see her take on the same sort of obstinance that disabled people display whenever someone, even a friend, tries to help them. They feel as though they're being patronized and they just want to be left alone to do it themselves. Troy is no different, illustrating that even therapists are not infallible. Just like the rest of us, they can easily become blind to the fact that they're exhibiting behaviors that they see in their patients. It really hits the peak when she blows up at Dr. Crusher, asking, how do you people live like this? For a side note, I think I can understand the dizziness and discomfort that Troy was feeling when she suddenly lost her empathic ability. I would imagine that it's analogous to, if you'll pardon the unpleasant imagery, like flushing out earwax blockage after it's been there a while and you've gotten used to it. You suddenly get dizzy when it's out, or when you pop your ears when changing altitude. You don't realize what you hadn't been hearing for some time.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I do have a nitpick that will expand upon Mize, actually, but I'll save that for things left unsaid and go straight to my memorable quote of the episode, which Carrie alluded to, which is, of course, Roy Riker saying, "You'd be surprised how far a hug goes with Geordi or Worf."
Excellent. Thank you very much, Chris McGee, the Dark Lord. All right. Faith Howell is waiting patiently on the bridge of the Enterprise D. What did you think of this one, Faith Howell? Did you love it?
I won't say loved it, but definitely appreciated that there was a message. That's always something that I look for in Trek, and always appreciate when they really hit a home run. I kind of disagree with some of you guys. I think Troy was well within her rights to wallow and to act, the way she was acting, because she was having real feelings in the moment, right? She was going through some stuff, and we don't get to tell other people how to have their feelings and how to experience their own trauma. So in that respect, I think it made sense to me, even though, of course, we don't want her to act that way. Sometimes life is like that. It also reminded me of Odo, when Odo lost his shape-shifting ability. Mm-hmm. It reminded me of the Doctor in the episode where Kes reprogrammed him, I think, and made him sick for longer than he expected to be sick. They both went through that sort of feeling of loss of control over their lives, and it, as you saw, messed them both up. I will say with Riker, it didn't make sense to me that he was in that consultation with the Doctor, even as a superior officer. Like, that's not a place that he belonged. And so while it may not be canon at this point, it is definitely headcanon that something else was going on between them behind the scenes. We just aren't necessarily privy to it, because why else would he even have been there? But then my favorite scene, I think many of you will agree with, is the scene where Guinan snuck up on on Troy, and that scene was great, both in the rating and then playing off of each other. And it also occurred to me, Sirach, you have brought up multiple times how with Guinan here, why do we need Troy? Well, there we go. We put them both in a room together and let them duke it out. So that was a fun little interaction to watch. And I think Troy better look out for her job. So.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Faith Howell. All right. The Matt Boardman wearing a cool, by the way, Ferengi family shirt. Looking good there. Matt, what did you think about this episode on your 14th viewing?
It actually hit a little different this time than it has in previous viewings. And maybe again, maybe it's because I've gone through a few things in recent years where my life has suddenly changed in ways. And I used to watch this episode and like others have mentioned, I used to think that Troy's reaction was over the top. I would be like, well, isn't she professionally trained as a counselor? Isn't she, you would think she has this momentary setback, but at the same time, we can't always predict how we're going to respond to a situation. I mean, adversity really shows us, I don't want to say our true character, because I'd like to think that Deanna is a little bit more than this situation, but this was something significant that happened to her. And so, yeah, I, like Melissa said at the very beginning, I mean, we watched her go through the stages of grief in this episode. And I think sometimes we forget ourselves when faced that our initial reaction forgets ourselves, because it reminded me of, we always say, people say doctors always make the worst patients. And that's exactly what happened here. Because I think there was a level of like arrogance, maybe, that she knew I'm a counselor. I know what's going on. You don't tell me, and, but I liked that we got to see Troy do something different that didn't put her in a romantic situation, because I'm sorry, but just some of the other romantic situations that they put Troy in are very cringy to me, because I think guys know how to write for her character. The same with Crusher, but anyway, but I guess just to wrap it up, I enjoyed it more this time. I think I could understand her reaction a little bit, and I think it's a great a look into Troy and Riker's relationship, and you get a sense here that, and actually I think for the first time since Encounter at Farpoint, where they first see each other after a while, where you kind of get that feeling that there's something more than um but you actually get a sense that there was a foundation in their relationship, that they were able to feel safe with each other in this situation and to say the things that they did.
Yes, very nice. Thank you very much. The Matt Boardman. Matt is actually his middle name. This is not a nickname, you guys. The is his first name. Jake's final take. Sirach, any final thoughts on this episode?
Yeah, after listening to everybody, I kind of got the sense that everybody was kind of mansplaining to Troy about what she was going through. Like, I had a professor who was in a wheelchair once, and when you lose your senses, this is what happens, and even Beverly, and how she was kind of dealing, and she's like, yeah, I'm a psychologist. You don't have to explain it to me, Beverly. I get it. I know. And all that mansplaining, I think, was too much for her. I think she just needed a hug, which is what Riker was doing. Like, hey, you know what? I get that something traumatic just happened to you. You need a hug. I don't need to explain to you about, your job requirements and what you should be acting like in this moment. You just need somebody to empathize with you, that you are feeling this pain, and acknowledge it, and just, be there for you and listen. So I think there was some of that was going on. And I think that's why the Riker Troy hug moment resonated so much with me. I really liked it, especially at the end when he says, "I'm going to come back and check in on you," and she's like, "You don't have to check in on me," and he's like, "No, I'm going to check in. Like, I'm not. I care about you. I want to know that you're going to be okay." And I think that's really what it comes down to. I mean, we know what people's responsibilities are, and these are you're supposed to know this, and as a psychologist, we expect you to do this, and yeah, all of that is true. But right now, I'm having a little bit of a meltdown moment, and I need somebody to give me a hug and tell me it's going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay. And I felt like there wasn't enough of that, which is why Riker did a great job of being that for her, and shows me why they make a good couple. Like they make a good couple because even though she was pushing him away, like, "Get away from me, I don't want to," he was like, "No, no, no, I'm going to give you this hug. I know you need it, and you can be mad at me, but I'm gonna do it." And I thought that's what makes them a couple. That even when he was straight with her, she didn't have to read his emotion. He was like, "You know what? I think you've been kind of, acting like an aristocratic betazoid and he was being straight. So it's not like she has to, like, I guess, I wonder what he's thinking or feeling. Like, he was telling her. So all of those reasons why I really love Riker Troy as a couple. There was even a look that he gave her when they were all at the conference table. He kind of looked at her, like, gave her a look.
Oh,
Yeah. And the looks right there just they communicate with each other without even talking to each other. That's the couple thing, right? It's like, I can just look at you and I'm uncomfortable right now. I'm not feeling good right now. I want to go. Whatever it is, there's that couple look that you do with each other. And I thought Riker and Troy did a great job with that in this episode. And then the last thing I was going to say was, I thought that part of this episode was going to have to tie in with the woman whose husband died, and I thought this was going to be a ghost-like episode. They mentioned the word ghost, and I thought that somehow the spirit of this dead husband was what they were running into or encountering, maybe through the conversations or channeling him or however it was. I don't know. But I thought the ghost of this guy was part of the storyline. And I was pleasantly, even though the physics and science was not exactly accurate, I was pleasantly surprised that it wasn't. So altogether, I think it's better than a 6 episode. And, I liked it. I liked it too. So that's my final.
Mm-hmm. All right, that's it for us, everybody. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. This episode is way better than a 6, you guys. Come on. Good grief. I watched it today. I was like, this episode is actually good. Like, of course she's going to react this way. Of course she's not perfect. Jeez. Cut her some slack. Let her pout for 35 minutes. Jesus.
right?
Anyway. All right, everybody, that's it for us. Thank you very much to the Matt, Faith, Chris, Allison, Mai, Carrie, Mike, Stephanie, and Melissa. For myself, Sirach Lofton, Melissa Longo, and Aaron Eisenberg. Thank you all very much for hanging out with us. We will see you next time. And until then, always remember the 7th rule.